So hello guys, so today we talk about forced induction in internal combustion engines. And what is this forced induction? What are you really talking about? So forced induction is the art of getting more air into your engine. Yeah. So maybe kuna msee anashangaa, why do we even need to get more air into the engine? Hold on. Your chemistry teacher probably told you that the rate of combustion is dependent on the amount of oxygen present in the combustion space. Does that ring a bell? So internal combustion engines are dependent on oxygen. That means they burn fuel in presence of oxygen to produce power. Does that ring a second bell? So in the case that you get more air into the engine, you are getting more oxygen in the engine. Thus you're increasing the rate of combustion in the engine. This means you are getting more power from the same engine. Wow. So for normal cars, that is the Toyota Probox, the Corolla and the rest, there is no forced induction of air into the engine. So these vehicles will belong to a group of vehicles called naturally aspirated engine vehicles. A naturally aspirated engine actually means that the engine is solely dependent on atmospheric pressure to get air into the engine, and it does so by introducing a vacuum during the intake or cycle of the engine. Yeah. So what are the different ways of forced induction of air into the engine? So there are two main types of forced induction, that is use of turbos and employment of a supercharger, which is the big daddy in this game of forced induction. So turbos were first applied during I think it's around during the end of the First World War, and they realized that when planes go to higher altitudes, which means there is less oxygen in high altitudes, the performance of the planes were deeply affected, and they started thinking of ways of forcing air into the engines, because you cannot be dependent on the air atmospheric pressure and expect too much air getting into the engine at such high altitudes. Yeah. So basically what a turbo does, it actually tries to recycle the energy lost through the exhaust of a vehicle. So a turbo mainly consists of a turbine on one side and a kind of rotor or impeller on the other side. Yeah? So to install a turbo, what they actually do is that they cut the exhaust of the vehicle and connect it to the turbine side of the turbo. So the turbine will be rotated by the exhaust gases. In turn, the turbine rotates the other rotor, which acts like an air pump and sucks air from outside the vehicle and forces the air into the engine. So basically the air that gets into the engine from the turbo is compressed air, which means it has high oxygen content. And another problem that arose during the development of the turbo is that they realized that the air was getting hotter and hotter. This is because the turbo gets too hot due to the hot nature of exhaust gases. So they had to come up with a solution of cooling the air, because as you know, if air is subjected to high temperatures, it expands, reducing the oxygen content. So now they developed what we call an intercooler. So air from the turbo is first taken through an intercooler, which cools the air, and then the air from the intercooler goes to the intake manifold of the engine, thus turbocharging your car. This one, coupled to the right amount of fuel ratio, you get the right power figures. And that is where now tuning comes in. Tuning is trying to make sure the engine is getting the right amount of fuel and the right amount of air from the turbo to produce the optimum power for the engine. So one disadvantage of turbos is that at lower RPMs, the turbine of the turbo is probably spinning too slow to get enough compressed air in the engine, and that's why we have turbo lag. Turbo lag is like ile time turbo iko kwa usingizi, bado ijaamka vizuri. That is what we call lag. And when the lag is over, that one the turbo kicks in. Now the engine has the optimum amount of power it was supposed to produce in the beginning. So no maana unaona gari ziko na turbo, ikianza inaanza slow, but as RPMs rise, ina kick in at once, which means turbo now is giving the optimum amount of compressed air into the engine. So on to the supercharger. The supercharger is actually like a hybrid of a turbo, which means it works on the same principle of sucking air and compressing it and then forcing it into the engine. Yeah, that's how a supercharger works. But now the difference comes in the method of propulsion. That is how both turbines, the turbine of the supercharger is rotated. Yeah. Remember, for the turbocharger takes advantage of the exhaust gases, which means the turbine is dependent on the exhaust gases. But for the supercharger, in a bid to avoid turbo lag, this means we want instant boost, that is instant loads of compressed air in the engine. What they did is that they developed some kind of pulley system that is connected to the crankshaft of the engine, similar to the connection between the crankshaft and the timing chain. And there's one pulley down there, the crankshaft, and there's a belt which connects it to another pulley on the supercharger, and this pulley turns the rotor of the supercharger, sucking air. And now what this means is that at any RPM, that is at any revolutions per minute of the engine, you will have instant loads of compressed air. That is what we call instant boost at any RPM, and that is one big advantage of having a supercharger form of turbo forced induction. So superchargers are mainly applied in high performance and huge engines, especially American brands, those V8 brands of America, kina Dodge, Chevy, that is Chevy, Dodge, and Ford Mustangs zinakuja na supercharger. A good example is the Dodge Hellcat. The Dodge Hellcat comes with 707 horsepower from a 6.2 liter supercharged V8 engine. These are huge amounts of power. Find even that the Dodge hellcat Red Eye, this is a big daddy, it has 797 horsepower due to the power of the supercharger. And remember, a normal Dodge Challenger has it's known as the RT, has only around 450 HP. This is the naturally aspirated version. But when you add a supercharger to the same engine and a bit of tuning and strengthening of the cylinder head, valves, and the rest, you can beef up the power from 450 to get 750 HP on the Dodge Hellcat. So the main disadvantage of superchargers is that they have what we call parasitic power losses. So this means that as you get to higher RPMs, remember the supercharger takes power from the crankshaft, we lose some horsepower to the supercharger, but at the same time it is giving us some power. I don't like it to call it parasitic. I think it is a symbiotic kind of relationship where you give me power and I give you boost. So most people call it parasitic, but I tend to think they work hand in hand, because as the supercharger is giving the engine power, it takes up some power from the same engine. That is a symbiotic relationship. I'm an guys. So that is the main issue. Unapatanga sema una produce around 500 horsepower, around 50 horsepower is lost to the supercharger. That is it's lost to the rotating the supercharger, which is we can live with that anyway. So a big application of turbos is in performance vehicles, and especially smaller engines such as the 4 cylinders. You find that, and the V6s, when them using the turbos. And turbos have many different setups. They may be bi-turbo, which means the engine has 2 turbos. They may be sequential turbos, which means one turbo is feeding to another, is feeding air to another turbo, all such and such and such. Yeah. So another big application of turbos is the diesel engines. That is diesel generators, trucks, and especially on heavy commercial, even now on smaller engines nowadays. So remember, diesel engines work on the principle of compression. They compress air to high temperatures. So that's when they inject the diesel, it turns into a flame. So turbos ensure that the engine compressed enough air, that is enough oxygen, so that when the diesel is coming in, you will have in the right combustion taking place in the engine. And this does wonders. If you look at truck engines, they are going to smaller and smaller diesel engines. This is due to acceptance of turbos. You find that if a truck was using a 10-liter engine, it will now probably be having a 6-liter engine, which produces much power than the previous 10-liter engine. This is because of forced induction, and that is basically the power of forced induction. Is basically getting more power from a smaller engine. That is where the magic comes in. I think you loved this, you learned a lot from this. So for more and even more of fun on learning about cars, just subscribe, like and share to support my content. Yeah, thank you guys.